Welcome everybody to the Indo-American Arts Council's Literary Fest. Today we have a wonderful program for you. Two distinguished writers. One, Trisha Gupta, who is a critic from Delhi, and Professor Narayan Hegde, who has translated the book that we will be discussing. The book we will be discussing today is called Avasthe, by Professor U.R. Ananthamurthy, one of the most distinguished writers of the last century and this century, and a leading public intellectual of India. And this book will be discussed by Trisha Gupta, who is an independent writer and critic. After full-time stints at the Time Out Delhi, Tehelka, and the literary journal Biblio, she turned freelance in 2010. Trisha has helped launch a city magazine, copy-edited senior academics and first-time fiction writers, and has been associate editor of the bilingual literary journal Pratilipi.in. She has been a columnist for the Sunday Guardian, the Hindu Business Line, and the Voice of Fashion. For the last 7 years, she has written a weekly column on cinema for the Mumbai Mirror, now called Times of India Plus in its digital avatar. She writes for a wide range of publications, including Scroll, The Caravan, Mint Lounge, India Today, National Geographic Traveler, among many others, some of the most important publications. Her body of work includes the entire gamut of culture, reviews, features, op-eds, interviews, profiles, and critical essays, and ranges from long-form writing to short pieces. While closely following developments in cinema and literature, she also writes about theater, photography, art, architecture, heritage, and habitat conservation, as well as the class and caste and gender-based politics of urban India today. Her academic grounding is in history and sociocultural anthropology. After a BA honors in history from St. Stephen's College in Delhi, she received an MA in anthropology from Cambridge University, followed by an MPhil from Columbia University in 2008. Her first book of nonfiction will be published soon by Amazon Westland in 2022. As an associate professor at the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, she teaches writing courses as well as courses drawing on her varied interests in culture and society. Welcome, Ms. Gupta.
Thank you so much.
Sure. The translator of the book that we'll be discussing, Avasthe, is a friend of mine, Professor Narayan Hegde. He is Emeritus Professor of English at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury, where he has taught English and world literature. He is an internationally recognized scholar on the writings of William Butler Yeats. As a senior fellow of the American Institute of Indian Studies, he has translated several literary works from his native Kannada language, including some of the most important works and some of the most important writers in Kannada. The Stallion of the Sun and Other Stories by U.R. Ananthamurthy, Annaya's Anthropology by A.K. Ramanujan, Stories of Purnachandra Tejasvi and P. Lankesh. He has also translated the historically significant 19th century Kannada drama, The Marriage Farce of Iggappa Hegde, published by the Sahitya Academy in Indian Literature. He is recipient of the Katha Translation Award. He has presented papers on Kannada translation in international forums. In 2018, he received a literature fellowship of the National Endowment for the Arts for undertaking a retranslation of U.R. Ananthamurthy's novel Avasthe, which we'll be discussing today. This translation of the novel Avasthe has been published by HarperCollins in November 2020. Narayan Hegde is currently part of a team translating the 15th century Kannada epic Kumaravyasa Bharata for publication by Harvard University Press in its Murthy Classical Library of India series. I'm delighted to welcome my friend and colleague, Professor Narayan Hegde. Now, without further ado, I will ask them to start discussing the book Avasthe. Trisha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sridhar, for that very generous introduction. Thank you very much. And such a pleasure to be here and to be speaking with Professor Narayan Hegde, who has translated, I think, this marvelous novel, which I happened to read and review some point earlier this year. And I was just, I mean, I know it's a very casual phrasing, but I was blown away by it, is what I want to say. And I'm so privileged to be having this conversation with Professor Hegde. We are in exceptionally weird times in terms of the pandemic, but certain things are enabled, such as a conversation between very distant places without having to actually be next to each other. So shall we start? Is everything more or less in place?
Yeah, it looks like it. Go ahead.
Okay, so Professor Hegde, I thought I would just ask you, I would start by asking you about your association with Professor Ananthamurthy. You are Ananthamurthy, URA, as you refer to him. And I believe it goes back all the way to your student days in Mysore. And I was wondering if you would just start by telling us something about that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sridhar, for that extraordinarily generous introduction. Yes, Trisha, yes, yeah, you're right. My association goes back with URA with more than 50 years. I have this dubious distinction, perhaps, of being not only one of the first to translate U.R. Ananthamurthy, but also as being the only one who translated him into 2 languages. In 1962 or 1963, I had just come to know him. He was my mentor and inspiration. I was an undergraduate at the Maharaja's College, where he was the rising star. So I already in 1963, before his fame spread outside of Karnataka, I had translated his short story called Prakriti into Hindi.
Oh, I see.
This should come as a surprise to you, Trisha.
Yes, it does.
And the story was published in a Government of India publication called Ajkal.
Yeah, okay.
So that is the dubious distinction I was mentioning about. Later on, after I moved to the United States, years after, in fact, I kept in touch with Ananthamurthy, Whenever he was in this part of the United States, he used to come and stay with us. And sometime in 1986 or 87, he was staying with us on Long Island. And then he gave me the story that he had just written and published. It was called, in Kannada, it was called Surina Kudure, which translates as, I translated as Stallion of the Sun. I was so moved by the story, I could readily identify with the protagonist as well as the narrator of the story. So I said that this should be brought to the attention of the world. He said, "Why don't you do it?" That's how my translating Ananthamurthy started. Now, they say that in order to be an effective translator, the translator should be thoroughly familiar with the milieu of the work that he is translating. And it so happens that both your Ananthamurthy and I share a lot of things in common. We come from the same region of Karnataka, which is called Malenadu.
Right, yes.
Malenadu. And his traditional background is similar to my traditional background that I grew up in. And we share this same sense of having to bridge both tradition and modernity. So I naturally felt like identifying with your Ananthamurthy, and he has been an inspiration. So I started translating his other significant short stories. And as Professor Sridhar mentioned, I had a fellowship to go to India and spend a year there, interacting with important writers, including, of course, your Ananthamurthy, and with his awareness, with his knowledge, not necessarily his participation, I started translating his story, and the rest is history. The first collection of his major short stories, I think seven major short stories, collected under the title Stallion of the Sun story, published by Penguin Books, Penguin India. And it's only recently that after Ananthamurthy passed away in 2014, his family, especially his daughter and his son-in-law, Vivek Shanabha, who is himself a fine Kannada writer, felt that his novel, Avasthe, needs to be retranslated, and I agreed with it. And we decided that I should take up the translation. And Avasthe, my translation of Avasthe, was published just about exactly a year ago. And that is the book that we are talking about.
Yes. Thank you so much for that introduction. You brought up lots of things that I want to ask you more about. And let me actually perhaps start by just picking up on something perhaps small that you mentioned about Stallion of the Sun and your identification with the protagonist. I wonder if you would want to say something about that story, and maybe that'll lead us into different directions. Is there about that identification that you're talking about?
Of a stallion of the sun, or the Surya Kudre itself, was written at a time, at a period in Ananthamurthy's writings, where he was himself had himself experimented or dealt with the clash of modernity and tradition, and he had reached, I think, a stage in his writing career where he started re-examining his espousal of modernity as the solution to the issues of the contemporary society. And he had begun to show some misgivings about the modernity as the solution. So he had come to accept the notion that tradition might also have some value still that is worth pursuing. And so he is now in the character of the protagonist. Venkata is his name in the short story. He subjects the entire issue of modernity to a very skeptical, sometimes even rigorous scrutiny. And there he presents himself, the narrator, which is the autobiographical, as representing modernity, and this protagonist as somebody who is untouched by, uncontaminated by, almost, modernity. And he, in his admiration of the simplicity of the protagonist, Venkata, finally the author is coming around in showing us a degree of skepticism towards modernity itself.
So this, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but this is absolutely, it brings us to, I feel like it's a slightly side angle from which to approach the novel that we are here to discuss today. But I do feel that there are many themes. I, of course, should put the caveat there that I do not know Kannada, so I've only read Ananthamurthy in English translation, and it is true that some of the previous translations don't grip you in the way that they could or should, as was really made apparent to me when I read Avasthe. Or perhaps it is about themes or those things as well, but yeah, I was wondering whether, this it's clear from even the little that I know, and also the films of Samskara and of Ghatashrad, the Girish Kasaravalli film. These are really my windows into Ananthamurthy. Apart from, excuse me, apart from having a sense of him as a sort of tremendous public intellectual figure that until he lived, until 2014, I think, was Indian public sphere in a way that few writers remain that have that kind of popularity, as well as influence, as well as are taken seriously by a vast. So I feel like these things do come together, and in the kind of the thing that you're pointing to about his own sort of reflexive quality, the fact that he wasn't a static thinker. He seems to have thought a great deal about what he thought before and changed over the years. And I find this quite. And I was going to ask you whether maybe I'm not sure whether we should begin by perhaps saying a little bit more about the novel that we are here to discuss, maybe to introduce it for our viewers before we come back to the thematics. Would you like to summarize the novel a little bit for our viewers, or would you like me to do that?
Well,
and we can also do a brief reading, of course, as we discuss.
We can do that. We can both do that. Of course, you have read it and you have written a review of the novel. Probably you have a more fresh memory of the novel. It's been quite some time since I dealt with the novel. In any case, as you know, the novel traces the life of Krishnappa Gowda and his introspective journey, and the challenges underlying as an individual in his life, both personally and politically. And I'm sure you are aware that Krishnappa Gowda, the character of Krishnappa Gowda, is a thinly veiled representation of a real life politician whom Ananthamurthy knew very well. He's a close friend.
Wait, I lost your voice. Who is the politician? The real person?
The real person. His name is Shantaveri Gopal Gowda.
Right.
Who was a socialist Lohiite Karnataka politician, a social reformer, coming from a farming class. He took up the cause of the farmers of Karnataka, and he was a highly principled politician, which was rare, which is rare even now in Indian politics. In fact, I might as well share that after the publication of Avasthe in 1978, and after the movie was made based on the novel.
Yes. Which was only a couple of years later, right? This is a film I have not seen, in fact, but I will now look for it.
Yeah. After the movie was made, Shantaveri Gopal Gowda's wife sued Ananthamurthy because she felt that her role in the novel has been portrayed unfavorably.
Yes, I can understand that.
Yes.
I have to say. Yeah.
And of course, Ananthamurthy won because it was a fictionalized version of the novel, and there was no justification to say that it was based on real life. So that is the thing.
But he was quite identifiable. He would have been, I wanted to just press you on that. Would he have been quite identifiable as a character for anyone that read the novel in Kannada at that time?
Yes. Anyone who had read the novel and anyone who had heard of Shantaveri Gopal Gowda would have no problem identifying with it. But legalistically, it was not it was not sustainable. Yes.
Right. Right. So I feel like I mean, as I said when I was writing about the novel, I think apart from the fact that the character is in just the fact of having a politician as the protagonist is unusual. There are not that many Indian novels, perhaps not even that many novels in the world that have a politician protagonist and a full-time career politician. Not not someone happens to have sort of entered the political sphere in one moment, but this is somebody that is looking back at a life spent pretty much in politics. I'm going to do that job of slightly telling readers what that novel does. It opens with Krishnappa Gowda in a sort of what can one say? He's in a state of physical semi-paralysis, and that is both real physical paralysis, but it is certainly used, I think, by Ananthamurthy as a semi-metaphorical device, because there is also a state of paralysis in his mind. He feels stuck. He feels unsure of what to do next. And he has a vast range of thoughts running through his mind, many of which are sort of threads of the past and many different pasts. So the novel sort of it proceeds in a fairly stream of consciousness way, perhaps you might want to call it that. Yes. And certainly in an often non-linear fashion, which I think, Professor Hegde, you've spoken of how difficult and I would love to hear more about this from you, about the translating of it. We'll come to that part later. But I actually felt that the quality of the narration, which is not a first-person novel, but it's almost entirely told from the point of view of Krishnappa Gowda. My sense was that when I was reading, I had a sense that I am reading somebody who is really that flow, that it isn't linear, and yet it is very recognizable as the slightly scattered thoughts that you might have if you are expecting not to live very long. You're thinking about everything in your life, and it just keeps coming and going between that and the present. I didn't find it, for me, I didn't find it confusing. I found it stellar in its recreation of one man's mental space. And I was wondering, maybe perhaps one way to introduce the novel for people that I would love to have people read it. So I was wondering whether we could do the reading. I could do one of the small sections in the beginning of the novel, just to give people a flavor of the prose and of the story as well, of this character. And then we can come back to talking about it. Is that okay with you, Professor Gowda? Professor Hegde? I'm calling you Professor Gowda, which is hilariously bad, but I'm really inside the novel, clearly.
Yes. You have very rightly identified it by using the term stream of consciousness. Probably the passage that you're going to read will illustrate that. The narration, which is anything but linear, it's the circular one. Within a single paragraph, you come across the narrative complexity of switching from present tense to the past tense, and the first person to third person, and which can be baffling to an uninitiated reader.
Yes, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah, and you can imagine how challenging it can be to a translator into a language that is quite different from the Kannada language in terms of syntax and all that. This is challenging. Go ahead and.
But we'll come back to it. I want to read that section, which is quite towards the beginning of the novel. Perhaps this might be. But let me start reading, and perhaps if it seems too long, then I'll just I'll skip ahead. I was thinking of the section from page 5. Professor Sridhar has shown everybody the novel, but I'm going to just show it again, just because it's a lovely cover as well. I think. A truly stunning cover by Bonita Vaz Shimre cover. Okay, I'm going to read from page 5. This is He's thinking about his boyhood years and Krishnappa Gowda, this central figure, the protagonist. And he, as a young boy, he says he had to work as a cowherd. And a little while later, he talks about. I'm just going to start from what makes sense to me. At this point, he remembers Maheshwaraya, who freed him from the drudgery of being a boy cowherd. No one knows who Maheshwaraya was or where he was from. Let's say he moved from somewhere to this new place. The first thing he did was set up a tidy house. Although he lived alone, he kept a cook, but he would wash his own clothes. You should have heard him recite Kalidasa's poetry in Sanskrit or his classical Hindustani style singing. A great pleasure loving man he was. His handlebar moustache above lips that were reddened from chewing betel leaf, the glittering diamond studs in his ears, his closed collar coat, the pure white dhoti that he wore elegantly, the silver-handled cane in his grip, and his serene demeanor. Krishnappa describes these and adds that he was also a great ascetic. Though Maheshwaraya himself would not have been so open, it is Krishnappa's guess that he had left home upon coming to know of his wife's taking a lover. After letting his wife have a part of the estate, Maheshwaraya, who was a millionaire, put the rest in the bank, retired from everything, and set out, wandering from place to place. He read all the time. The man was a visionary who knew the past, the present, and the future. Let's say he arrived at a house. Upon sitting down, suddenly he would let out a cry, Bho. Then there would settle an uneasy look on his face. Though he knew a sense of foreboding had come over him, he wouldn't say more, no matter how much his host begged. Later, he would whisper his misgivings in Krishnappa's ear. People avoided running into him for fear he might blurt out, Bho. It was so spontaneous that he couldn't help it. That is why he would sometimes refuse invitations. To Krishnappa, he would say, I don't know what disaster awaits that poor man. I won't go to his house. Sadly, though Maheshwaraya could foretell the future, he rarely saw any good in it. The one time it was different. He saw in Krishnappa's future something good. This is how it went. The boy Krishnappa, in his dirty shorts and shirt, was sitting under a peepal tree on the river bank. The paddy had been harvested. He was not worried about the cattle straying into people's fields. With the murmur of the flowing river and the tinkling of the cowbells, Krishnappa must have felt blissful, perhaps more blissful than usual. Instead of playing the bamboo flute, that day he felt like singing the lines from Kumaravyasa's Bharata. He had studied only up to the 4th standard, and so it was not something he had read while at school. He had picked it up from listening to the old Brahmin Joysa, who was his teacher. That day, as he got carried away, he sang with great feeling. Not far from where he was sitting, Maheshwaraya, who had been camping out in a nearby town, was washing his coat in the river. How he happened to be at that very spot that day is a wonder. I note for readers the way that he weaves one story into another, into another. Here, you have the memory of Maheshwaraya and him encountering each other, in which we have a memory of Maheshwaraya encountering a beggar. How he happened to be at that very spot that day is a wonder. It seems earlier that day, when he was walking in the market, he was stopped by a retired school teacher who had gone somewhat crazy. The man asked Maheshwaraya for his coat. Of course, you can have it, Maheshwaraya told him, but because I have worn it, I want to wash it before giving it to you. He bought a bar of soap and came to this river bank, walking 2 miles from the town. Maheshwaraya stood before the singing boy and said, Bho. Embarrassed, Krishnappa stopped. Hey boy, after you are done with the cattle, come back here in the evening and wait for me. Maheshwaraya said, the coat dripping in his hand while he looked distractedly into the distance. He walked away, wringing the coat, and Krishnappa now remembers there were 2 flamboyant parrots in the guava tree across from where he was sitting under the peepal. He also remembers that he had never seen the bird in such unusual colors before. In the evening, Krishnappa waited. Maheshwaraya arrived, swinging his walking stick. What a dumb boy. All this time, you haven't understood who you are, have you? Come with me, he said. And they went directly to where Krishnappa lived. His mother lived with her elder brother in his house, doing chores for him and his wife. Chores such as grinding batter for kadubu, cooking the cattle feed, gathering leaves and twigs from the forest for the compost, all the while being nagged by the brother's wife. Krishnappa's father had died. When he saw Maheshwaraya, the gold rings on his fingers, the gold studs in his ears, and that silver-capped cane in his hand, Krishnappa's uncle stood up in awe. How stupid you people are, Maheshwaraya scolded the house roundly. You have here a precious gem in your home and you don't have the eyes to see it. He gave them some money and made arrangements for Krishnappa to board in a student hostel which was 10 miles away so that he could go to a school. After setting up the fund for his schooling expenses, Maheshwaraya disappeared. Once a year, he visited the boy to find out how he was doing. That is how Krishnappa was able to get an education all the way up to a BA. This is where I was thinking I'll stop. It is one part of the story of Krishnappa Gowda, which is full of remarkable set pieces, and this is one of them. The meeting with Maheshwaraya. I find the figure of this man, unforgettable. In fact, the ascetic who is also a master of what does he call it? Naughty, you call it naughty Sanskrit poetry. Who
and his taste for women. He patronizes prostitutes. And the narrator, in this case Krishnappa Gowda, calls him an ascetic.
Exactly.
A spiritually minded person. Look at the contradiction in the personality of Maheshwaraya. The novel is full of characters that are inherently contradictory in themselves.
Yes, and I feel like as we all are, in fact. So, which is it's I don't even have the words to describe quite how much he Ananthamurthy seems to me, just even from this one novel, to have a sort of a really complex understanding of the human psyche, where you're constantly questioning yourself. Maheshwaraya, perhaps we don't hear him talking about himself so much. But Krishnappa Gowda, to return to Krishnappa Gowda, is constantly looking at his own behavior and questioning himself. And this, I think, makes him both an exceptionally arresting protagonist, but a very rare protagonist to be a politician. And especially given where we are now, where I feel like the idea of politics everywhere, perhaps in the world, but certainly in South Asia, is very much about right and wrong, and about knowing, having a sort of closed ideological position on various sorts of things. I feel like Krishnappa Gowda very, very much has, strong views, and yet he challenges himself. Did you feel that was that something that I feel like, is that true, would you say, of Ananthamurthy's characters in general, or is that something that is particularly so of Avasthe?
Well, Krishnappa Gowda should not be a total stranger to any of us, in the sense that politicians, if rare as they are, if they are given to some intellectual pursuits, which Krishnappa Gowda was, and the original politician Shantaveri Gopal Gowda was also. He was a literary scholar as well, which is a rare combination. And so a politician who tried to strike a balance between the real power and ethical values.
Yes.
And that kind of politician is a rare one. And also historically, the novel, when it was first written in Kannada, 1977 or 78, Indira Gandhi's attempt to become almost a dictator was very fresh in the psyche of the people, which, interestingly, translated as it was only last year, is still relevant to us because, as you were pointing out, not only in India but in many parts of the world, where leaders are teetering on the brink of dictatorship.
Yes. He makes very clear reference to the figure of a female prime minister, even though she's not named. Again, it's very vivid. The sense of distress that the protagonist feels, and his sense of sort of responsibility, or his sense that he can perhaps prevent this from happening, at least in Karnataka, or I think he makes reference to that sort of thing, because he sees himself as a Democrat, and yet, of course, he's also having those thoughts about whether he's just clinging to power himself, and
and surrounded as he is by the corrupt politicians who are almost literally supporting him in his, incapacitated condition.
Yeah, as a sort of, they almost seem to want to keep holding him up as a kind of mascot, right? And he's very torn between feeling honored or feeling needed, and recognizing that perhaps he cannot be what he would like to be. Yeah, I feel like sorry, yes.
Yeah, if you think this is the right time for me to share a passage that almost brings out the essence of Krishnapa's torn kind of consciousness.
Yes, of course, please.
Can I go ahead?
Of course, of course.
This is towards the end of the novel. Krishnapa is doing his what has become his familiar pastime in his debilitated condition, which is introspection. Although he has come here, this would be page 178 for your reference.
Sure, yes.
Although he has come here seeking solitude, he is now staying in a nice estate, modern building, which, thanks to his benefactor, a corrupt politician. Although he has come here seeking solitude, Krishnapa misses the stream of visitors who came to him every day. Most people came to see him perhaps because he was dying, which made him feel that he was still an important man. Here, there is less of an opportunity for that satisfaction. To his consternation, he realizes that his will to live is nourished on luxuries provided by Veerana's generosity. The connection between his lifestyle and the corrupt system that provides him not only these amenities, but the support of the people is so close. Even as he spurns the position of chief minister, and by doing so perhaps further ensures the outcome, the conspiracy to make him the chief minister is relishable, and it brings new vitality in his declining health. His letter of resignation remains in his pocket. Maheshwaraya's prophecy ticks away in his mind. Does he really wish to become the chief minister by exploiting the present system, or is the wish to renounce it all, distance himself from the source of corruption, and in the face of death, once again strive for the good of the people as well as his own inner well-being stronger. Which of the two could be true? He had failed to find a question for the hermit. He had failed to find a question for the hermit that would have impelled an answer. He finds himself in a similar spot again. Perhaps it is that these questions are meaningless. There are no real moral dilemmas. It is doubtful that our deepest desires pull equally in opposite directions. Would I or should I not? If the soul is pulled more firmly in one direction, then it is not in a moral dilemma. It faces an impulse, an itch. We wish to look good to ourselves. With a sigh, he admits the realization that there would have been no question of his being tempted if he had disliked the environment in this retreat. It troubles him. He is certain in his mind that he had not been relying on Nagaraj to ignore his resignation, that he was not being melodramatic when he had left it to Nagaraj to decide what to do with his letter of resignation. Once again, Krishnappa is confused about his own thought process.
Yes. To warn readers, you will not find any of this confusing if you get to this when you get towards the end of the novel, because he has told us about this dilemma in more ways than one through the course of it. How are we doing for time, Professor Sridhar?
Yeah, I think we are doing pretty well.
How much more time do we have?
Well, we are almost out of time, but if you could wrap it up in a couple of minutes.
Okay, fine. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to ask. Maybe could so let me just. I was going to ask you about the relationship between the other works of Ananthamurthy. That was one question that there is a kind of critique and because we were talking about the traditional and the modern, and I think it sort of connects to that. There is a certain very sharp critique of the of Brahminical sort of society in the very famous works like Samskara or Ghatashraddha. And I feel like do you feel that there is a shift that takes place with Avasthe? Is there a more complex view of with the main figure that we have here is his sort of filial relationship he has with the Brahmin Joisa? So I wondered if you would say something about that.
Well, Ananthamurthy has been criticized by the traditional elements of society, that he is almost anti-Brahmin in his criticism of the Brahminical tradition. But even in his early novels such as Samskara, he is not entirely he's not critical of Brahminism or the Brahmin milieu as such, as much as he is of the hypocrisy of some Brahmins who seem to represent the Brahmin community. He sets up, even in his early novel, he sets up two kinds of Brahmins. For example, in Samskara, you have the spiritually minded, highly scholarly, otherworldly Praneshacharya, as opposed to the penal kind of the rest of the Brahmin community. So that contrast is always there. So as if Ananthamurthy is saying that many of the Brahmins have moved away from what makes Brahmins the minded, scholarly minded individuals. So that is his critique of Brahminism. The venality, the corruption, the hypocrisy that has crept into the modern time Brahmins.
That sort of holding them to themselves, or the theoretical version of
the
even
degeneration.
in the novel, the degeneration. Even in the simple Brahmins are represented by Joyce in his simplicity, in his principled stand, and as opposed to in the novel itself, you have the other Bhatta, the temple agent, who is corrupt.
Yes.
So there are two kinds of Brahmins in almost all Ananthamurthy's stories or novels.
But is Avasthe sort of, this is my, I'm going to wrap up very quickly, Professor Sridhar. I'm so sorry, but I feel like we haven't got into the meat of it.
It's
so
really a fascinating conversation. I wish we had a lot more time. But go ahead,
I'll
please.
Just wrap up quickly, but just to ask this question of whether is, because of course, Professor Hegde is somebody that really knows a lot more about Ananthamurthy's work than only translating this novel. But I wondered whether Avasthe is unique for having a sort of a Shudra protagonist named as such among Ananthamurthy's work. Is that something that, and what does that do for the language? Does it change the way that the language is given? That was one question that I had, connecting the form with the content.
Yes, you're right in the sense that a Shudra is the main character, the protagonist in the novel. But there are Shudras who appear in other stories and novels also, and almost invariably they are made to represent the simplicity of humankind.
So perhaps there is some strange romanticizing there, perhaps.
Yes, and also don't forget, insofar as Krishna Gowda's personal life, he has incorporated certain Brahminical element in his life. He has turned vegetarian very early in his life.
Yes,
and he's an expert in reciting Kumarvyasa Bharata, which is a purview of Brahmins, which has been in that sense he is an intellectual himself.
He's a bridging kind of figure in many ways. Yes,
incorporated certain elements of typical Brahmin pursuits in his own life.
Yeah, this is if I may jump in
wrap
here.
Up. Yes, so I will hand it over to Professor Sridhar if you wanted to add anything, or sorry to run over, but I really thought we must have at least a little bit more of that conversation.
No. Thank you so much, Trisha and Narayan. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've been following it, and it brings out many of the most important things that makes Ananthamurthy's works so interesting and so fascinating and so relevant to our contemporary society. And in particular, the last point that you just raised and that Narayan elaborated on. So a Shudra protagonist, but he is the Shudras sometimes are depicted in a rather simplistic fashion in Ananthamurthy's earlier novels like Samskara, where they represent elemental forces and kind of physical drives and things like that, and eating meat and fish and things like that, and sexual drive and things like that. But here you notice that the protagonist has evolved in a sense, in the sense that he has incorporated intellectual dimensions and introspective dimensions. He's a very self-reflexive character. He's constantly questioning himself and the morality of things and things like that. And this character is, as you might say, that, okay, he has incorporated some what used to be called Brahminical characters. But with the democratization of India, it is no longer just a Brahminical character. Any educated person would be expected to have these traits. And so, in a sense, the character of Krishnappa, the protagonist of this novel, represents the evolution of India, where these characteristics are no longer associated only with Brahmins, but there are lots and lots of educated, cultured, civilized, sophisticated, complex characters. And this has been kind of dissociated from Brahmanism, as it were. And
yes,
so
definitely.
that's a fascinating characteristic. And so this novel, therefore, is in a sense a reflection of modern India as well. How the people have evolved, the castes have evolved, people's education has evolved, and so on. And still some of the same problems of contradictions of, as Narayan said, the contrast between power and ethics continues to haunt. That's there in every universal problem of all politicians.
I was going to add only one small thing about the intellectual and the physical, which is, as Professor Sridhar is saying, it is very much about the fact that the intellectual is not limited by caste, but it is also that there is something fascinating about the body that's also always running through Avasthe, which is a kind of but not as a reduced thing. That the consciousness of the body is not something low; it is something deep and profound. Which I find fascinating in this
and
novel.
His desire for Gauri Deshpande, for example, and his desire for physical ecstasy, for instance, which he controls and which he kind of suppresses, and then finds other outlets for, etc.
Yeah,
and
it's really a beautiful novel.
Yes.
Sorry, Professor.
Go ahead, Narayan.
I was going to add his desire for Gauri Deshpande, at the same time, his recoiling from the physicality of the man-woman relationship until
in the beginning,
until he is liberated by Lucina, the other one.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really, there are so many dimensions to this, and there's so many interesting aspects of this, and everything, all these elemental conflicts, as it were, are represented through very concrete, very beautiful details of observed social and physical characteristics. And so it makes for a very rich texture of the novel. And you have translated that and brought it into English. And so we have to congratulate you on this wonderful service you have done for the readers. And so that non-Kannada readers can also get a glimpse of the richness of Ananthamurthy's work. And Trisha, through your reading and through your questioning and interview with Narayan, you have brought this out. And so I think our readers got a wonderful sample of the richness of Ananthamurthy's work. And so I would encourage all of you to read this novel. It is called Avasthe by Ananthamurthy, translated by Professor Narayan Hegde and introduced by Trisha Gupta today. So thank you all very much, and looking forward to seeing you at Indo-American Arts Council's Literary Fest meetings, hopefully in person as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Trisha.